Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So I decided to buy some new paint and a new brush. I'd been using the same brush for nearly 3 years, so I felt it was time to get a new one. Besides which, the old brush was starting, the hair of the brush was starting to fray a bit and fall apart, so yeah, I decided that it was a good time to invest in a new brush. I also needed some more paint. And while I was on the website looking for brushes and paint, it reminded me just how expensive all of this watercolor supplies, art supplies are. The paint, the brand that I usually use is Sennelier paint. And just to give an example of how expensive it is, the 21 milliliter Sennelier cadmium yellow light tube of paint is £14, just over £14, which is getting on for, at today's exchange rate, is almost $20 US. Just for interest, I decided to have a look on a US website just to see what the price is there. It's almost the same. It's maybe about $1 cheaper. But either way, it means that 1 milliliter of this paint, this cadmium yellow light paint, is almost $1 US, and a milliliter of paint is not a large amount of paint. It's a very, very small drop of paint. But while I was digging around on Jackson's Art website, Jackson's Art is a UK based art supplier, I found that they made their own brand of watercolor paint. And I also noticed that the names that they gave the colors were very similar, if not identical, to the Sennelier brand, which is a little bit unusual because usually these different brands have different names. I also noticed that the pigments were the same for both the Jackson's Art and the Sennelier colors, and the opacity and transparency and things are all about the same. So then I started digging around on the internet and found one blog where the guy had bought Jackson's Art watercolors, some tubes of paint, and he peeled back the label on one of the tubes of paint and found a Sennelier branding underneath. And it turns out, after a bit more investigation, that Jackson's Art watercolor is Sennelier watercolor. It's made by Sennelier, and it just has a different branding on the tubes. But it's about 43% cheaper. So I thought, well, why am I paying nearly twice as much for the same paint? Of course, it is possible that the reason it's so much cheaper is because the sort of ratio of pigment to binder and other additives is different. You can get lower quality paints, watercolor paints, and basically they're cheaper and they're lower quality because the amount of pigment is less. I think it's the pigment that really makes the paint expensive. So anyway, the only way I could find that out was to buy a few tubes and try it out myself, which is a very long-winded way of saying that I bought some Jackson's Art watercolor paint and I'm trying it out in this painting. Or at least the blues in the sky and the blue that I was using for the hills, the sort of undercoat, that's Jackson's Art paint. All of the other colors are still Sennelier watercolor paint. My initial impressions are that the Jackson's Art watercolor paint seems to be, I can't find any difference so far between that and the Sennelier branded paint. So if that is the case with the other colors, say the cadmium yellow and things as well, it will make a big difference to me because it makes watercolor painting more viable for me, financially speaking. Which is obviously an exciting sort of find for me, to find this cheaper paint that seems to be just as good quality. In terms of the new brush, so it was also Jackson's Art brand, but the main difference is it's a synthetic hairbrush. The brush that I was using before is a squirrel hairbrush, but I'm interested in getting away from using natural hairbrushes. I don't want to sort of stray into politics or anything in this channel. I want to stay away from that, but personally I wanted to try brushes that use synthetic hair rather than animal hair. So my initial impressions of the brush is it is very different. I don't know if it's because it's synthetic hair or just because the head of the brush is bigger, a little bit bigger, and it's a little bit different shape. So I don't know if that's what's affecting it. The amount of water that it holds is different than the brush that I used to use. So at the moment it's not a terrible thing, but it's something that I kind of have to get used to. There are other little things like, I say, the head of the brush is a slightly different shape. The handle is bigger, it's thicker, so the whole brush just feels different in my hand. It is a bit heavier and things. But those are sort of superficial things. It's just a matter of getting used to it. It's like, I guess, buying a new pair of shoes or something. It takes a little bit of time to get used to the difference. But anyway, that's my story about buying those tubes of paint and the new brush. And even though they are cheaper, those little box of paint tubes and that one new brush that I showed at the beginning, the entire price for that, when you add in shipping and taxes, was almost £60 sterling, which is more than $70 US. So it's still an expensive hobby. Anyway, back to the painting. This is a scan of the final painting, and I was happy with the painting. It's a bit washed out, and I think that might be, like I said, it's getting used to this new brush and the amount of water that it holds compared to the other brushes, the other brush that I used to use. But still, I like the final painting. I'm happy with the composition and things. Okay, well, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.